Alejandro Villanueva recently retired as an offensive tackle for the Baltimore Ravens of the NFL. He never missed a game in his 7-year career and was selected for the Pro Bowl twice. He even caught a touchdown pass.
Al grew up the son of Spanish parents in the U.S. while his dad worked for NATO and played football while attending West Point.
He then became an Army Ranger and served 3 tours in Afghanistan, earning a Bronze Star with Combat V for rescuing wounded soldiers while under enemy fire.
Al joined the NFL in 2014 as a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he played for 6 seasons before signing with the Baltimore Ravens. I'm retired astronaut Dr. Sandra Magnus.
And I'm retired Navy fighter pilot Admiral Sandy Winnefeld. We're 2 adrenaline junkies who love spending time with people who are really passionate about pushing their boundaries as far as possible. Many thanks to our sponsor for this episode, Dunkin'. Slow steeped, ultra smooth, Dunkin' cold brew should be at the top of any adrenaline seeker's checklist.
We caught up with Al to talk to him about life in the trenches not long after he announced his retirement.
Welcome to the Adrenaline Zone, and congratulations on your recent retirement announcement. We're going to ask you later what's coming next, but let's start all the way back at the beginning. You took a different path to the NFL than the average player. Tell us a little bit about growing up in a military family and deciding to go to West Point, and what your experience was like while you were there.
Yeah, so I grew up in a military environment, but maybe a different military environment than most U.S. service members. My father was in the Spanish Navy, and we were stationed all around the world, but primarily in Rota Naval Station, which is a joint American and Spanish military installation. I grew up watching Marines work out and get ready to go to Iraq and Afghanistan. And then I also grew up watching bullfighters, get ready for their Sunday ordeal. When I had to decide what I was going to do in my life, I was very inspired by the few, the pride, the Marines, the identity of the warriors, and the concept of joining something that was bigger than yourself. So I applied to a Naval Academy and United States Military Academy. But when it's time for me to do my physical to get in Kaiserslautern, Germany, I found out that I was colorblind, or I had a color deficiency. And so most of the jobs in the Navy were not something that I could do. And so I went to the military academy, walked onto the football team, and served my time as an infantry officer. And then when it was time for me to get out of the military and move on with my life, I decided, or I had this crazy idea, that if I played 1 year of football in the NFL, I would be able to pay for my business school, which is the path that most graduates take, after their commitment, because we're told that if you go to the academies, that that degree will take you very, very far. But the reality is that things are becoming very competitive, and you always need to have higher education. So unfortunately, it is very expensive to go to a top business school. And I recently just got married, so I thought that the NFL, maybe fooling a coach into thinking that I could play football, would be a path into educating myself and moving on with my life. So that's the path. Those are my intentions, and it all worked out, I guess.
So Al, we have a lot to talk about on the side, because I was privileged to have a Spanish Navy ship in my strike group, and they taught me how to cook paella. So you and I have to give that a shot sometime.
I have to say, it's kind of funny to hear that the NFL was a methods to a different path. It's like most people think, oh, I'm going to be a football player and that's my goal. For you, it's like, I'm going to be a football player so I can go get my MBA. That's hilarious.
Right, man with a strategy. I like it.
I gave myself maybe a 2% chance of being able to get into the NFL. After I completed my first year, I was very eager to go to Stanford or Chicago or Harvard. But the NFL was working out. I was able to play football, and fortunately, I was lucky enough to have Carnegie Mellon out in Pittsburgh, and so I was able to apply, go to Carnegie Mellon, and play football and go to school.
Now, you didn't go directly into the NFL, though, right? You hoped to get drafted right after the military academy, but that didn't quite work out then, right?
No, I mean, I was not even a good football player in college. I had a chance to go and join mini camps. So, for those who don't understand the paths into the NFL, the NFL is a marketing company and also a football organization. So, marketing is their primary um, goal in terms of selling to audiences. Whatever it is that they think is going to create the most amount of revenue. In the year 2014, the year that I got picked up after my army commitment, there was a lot of um, marketing revolving the military and the troops and um, you know the all the movies that were coming out of Navy SEALs and books, and so the NFL was utilizing the military as a way of connecting to the public, and that was my goal was to fit into this sort of marketing strategy and be able to play for 1 year so that I could pay for business school. They have several tryouts on the weekends called mini camps for the rookies, and they also have practice squads. So I got invited to go to mini camps after I graduated. So a weekend where you practice with the draft picks, and then I got the next level, which was practice squad, where you get to practice against the starters so that they don't get hurt. And that was the opportunity that I got with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I got a rookie mini camps with the Cincinnati Bengals, the Chicago Bears, and the Philadelphia Eagles, and then I got a chance to join the team and be part of the 53-man roster with the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens. But the path is not the same for everybody, and for me, especially coming out of college, and with both wars going on, I never hoped and I never wanted to get drafted, so I never had that opportunity. But I do know that it is somewhat of a controversial issue in the academies, whether they should be able to go straight into the professional leagues or they should have to serve first. Fortunately for me, I never had to make the decision. I was never drafted, and I never hoped to get drafted. I was hoping to get drafted by 10th Mountain Division, and I did.
So you went through infantry, airborne, and ranger schools, all challenging in their own right, and you did find yourself in the 10th Mountain Division. Tell our listeners about that journey.
Yeah, so graduating from the academy in 2010 was a very interesting time frame in our nation's history. I imagine that just like schools such as Harvard or Stanford, there's a culture of a competitive culture of getting the best jobs and being able to get internships with the top companies or startups or whatnot. At West Point, there was a sense of urgency of serving and being at the tip of the spear. So infantry was the most requested branch, and the cadets were very aware of the personnel charts of what unit was going where. I got a tip the last second before I picked my post that 10th Mountain Division was going to be sent to Afghanistan from Iraq. So instead of deploying to Iraq, because that theater was shutting down, they were going to send them as part of the surge that Obama announced in the year 2010 at West Point to Kandahar province. And that would be the hottest area, and that would be the place where you wanted to be. So I know that for some people it might seem counterintuitive, that you would want to be in the front lines and you want to be where the action is. But, the culture at West Point, especially when it came down to men at the time, since women were not allowed to serve in the infantry, was to volunteer for these assignments and serve to the best of your ability. So I got the tip. 10th Mountain Division was going to Kandahar province, and I selected that post. And then after that, when I looked at the timeline, I graduated in May. I had to get all my schooling done at Fort Benning, infantry basic leadership course, ranger school, and airborne school. And I had to get it done all before March, where my unit was deploying. So it was a very stressful time in my life. And then once I finished it up, I deployed And then a month into the deployment, a lieutenant got hurt, and I became the platoon leader. And then, the rest of the time was history.
So it was run to the sound of the guns. Great.
So when you got to Afghanistan, clearly you had this desire to be on the front lines. What'd you think? What did you learn? I mean, that's quite an adventure, really.
Yeah, it's a tough question. And so I had a very romanticized idea of what it was like to be at war, what it was like to see combat. And just like all, human beings, those romanticized ideas fade away with time as you get older. So when I was younger, I definitely had this vision, this sort of Lieutenant Dan idea of who I was and what my destiny was supposed to be. But the reality is that the war was a lot more complex than my simple emotions that I had as a teenager. For a lieutenant in the infantry in Afghanistan, the challenges of how we're going to win the war and what victory looked like became more complicated than the tactical maneuvers or overcoming fear with bullets and explosions. So tough war, very difficult to reconcile, especially afterwards and in the recent events of the past year. But it was a good experience because I learned a lot about myself. I was able to at least fulfill this idea that I had of myself as a warrior in combat. And I got to meet amazing human beings and I was able to give back and serve, which was, everything that I wanted to do in life. And especially coming from Spain, to be able to have a way into this great American nation and sort of feel the pride and the ownership of who we are as a country.
Duncan is made for everyone with the determination, the drive, and the guts to do something new or who wants to push their boundaries. It's the fuel for every mission, challenging pursuit, or adventure.
Whether you're embarking on a new journey or whether you're wrapping up your adventure, there'll be a Duncan waiting for you.
And if it's speed you're after, order ahead and it'll be ready when you get there. It's simple. In, out, and on your way. Al, speaking of ownership, you really took ownership of your Army experience and obviously did quite well. But what was the dynamic for you in terms of leaving the Army and, your consideration for a future in the service? Because you probably could have kept going, but there may have been factors that convinced you that it was time to move on in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was also a very emotional decision and very, it was a knee-jerk reaction. When I looked at my timeline as an officer, everybody has a timeline in their heads of where they're going to be. Basically, when I looked at my future, I was having maybe 12 months of being in front of soldiers and being the leader that I envisioned myself being out of 5-6 years. And so I knew that the war was going to be over. I knew that there was not going to be a way of us winning it with bombs and bullets. And I originally got married, and I was very unsure, that I was going to be moving my wife every 3 years for the rest of my life, pursuing something that quite frankly was not where my heart was. And so that's when I decided to get out and I started exploring the options, and everybody told me that I had to go to an MBA. And that's when the crazy idea of playing in the NFL came up. If I'd have known how to sing, I would have gone to American Idol and I would have maybe had a better shot at getting the money to pay for my MBA.
So Al, you were signed by Philadelphia in May of 2014, but ended up at Pittsburgh. Sounds like it took a while to learn the ropes on an NFL offensive line, but it must have caught on because you ended up playing in 2 Pro Bowls in 2017, 2018. Tell us about the learning process that took you from sort of a baby rookie to being a full-time starter on an NFL offensive line.
Yeah, so I never really had a position in college because I played so many different positions. I ended up playing wide receiver my last year at Army. I wasn't really a good football player, and a lot of the measurements that you need to play in the NFL, such as your receiving yards or sacks if you're a defensive player, or your bench and your 40-yard if you're a defensive lineman. I didn't have any of those qualities. Like I said earlier, my goal was to fool the NFL based on this marketing strategy that they had that was so enamored with the military, and just play as a backup for a year as I applied to go to business school. Playing football in the NFL was never a priority in my first few years in the NFL. I was more concerned with not being unemployed like I was right after I left the military and I was living with my in-laws. I was concerned of providing for my family and getting on the right track. So the NFL requires, a lot of attention to detail, and it requires a lot of strategy in terms of how you're going to figure out the game. It requires a lot of game theory, and there's a lot of carryover from the military and the things that I learned as a ranger or as an infantry officer. So I try to do my best every day. I had amazing coaches. The Pittsburgh Steelers is an amazing organization. I would have never been able to play for any other franchise because, quite frankly, no other franchise gave me the opportunity. And so I went to work every day. I showed up, did what they asked me to do. And then it wasn't until I finished applying to the business schools that I realized I had a chance to maybe make some money and stay in Pittsburgh and potentially apply to Carnegie Mellon. So once I got to that point, things became, a lot more clear to me. Additionally, and this is a lesson that, all service members, have to keep in mind. I had an issue with my credit score when I got out of the military because I did not do my out processing myself. Because I was with the Philadelphia Eagles, I was driving back and forth from Philadelphia to Savannah, Georgia, and I was having my XO do my out processing. He put an address on my DD-214 that was a street in Savannah, Georgia, the state of Maryland, and the zip code of Philadelphia. I don't know if you can screw up the only thing that matters in the DD-214 any more than he did. But the reality is that I didn't have an address either. My parents were in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
I had no family or any friends that I would trust with putting my DD-214 address on, and so I owed $250 of equipment that I'm sure somebody helped themselves with when I was out processing, and the Department of Defense issued me a debt of $250 that I had to pay, and obviously it landed nowhere for those 2 years where I was trying to apply for business school.
Bureaucracy at its best.
Right. So I went to collections. It sat there for 2 years, and then it wasn't until USAA came out with a credit score underneath your or somewhere on the browser with your credit card that I realized that I had a very, very bad credit score. And that's when I started laughing at all the commercials that I saw with creditkarma.com and somebody living in the basement with their parents and whatnot. So it put a lot of pressure on me at that point financially because I couldn't rent an apartment. I couldn't apply for a job. I never understood how important your credit score is until it's terrible. And so it created a need. I couldn't apply for a loan to go to business school. My first year in the NFL was in practice squad, so it didn't give me enough money to cover the expenses of the 2-3 years that it was going to take me to complete the course. So the financial need was there, and that put a sense of urgency into how to figure out how I can make some money in the NFL and how I can play football. So fortunately for me, offensive lineman was a more thoughtful or critical thinking position than most other positions in the field that require a lot more athletic ability. And so I was able to find how to play with your peers, with a man to your left and right. I had unbelievable teammates that took me under their wing. And so things worked out.
So you kind of switched between two different cultures, and you commented that there were some similarities between how you were thinking in the military and how you could apply that to football. Were there other cultural similarities? Was it a big leap from the military to the NFL, or was it very comfortable?
I've lived in so many places throughout my whole life. So it's really interesting to appreciate and see how different cultures operate.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a culture of military and service in the United States that is very embedded in who we are. And that goes back to the appreciation that this country has for its military. So when I came, to West Point and I started playing football, I was very shocked by certain things about the game of football. First of all, I was blown away by the fact that they were screaming and yelling when we were doing all these drills. They're demanding max effort. They're pushing you from one drill to the next. And the first thing that I thought about was, this is just like the military, meaning this is basic training. They're treating players with the same sort of attitude of hierarchy and command, and you do what I tell you. In Europe, it would be inconceivable to start screaming and yelling at kids. It's not something that is natural. Why are you screaming and yelling at me so much to do these drills? Why are you pitting me against my teammate to see who's tougher? Those things were incredibly interesting to me. And then once I got to the NFL, I just saw how much American football represents American society. So you have the owners, who are the few in society that control and have heavy influence over the lives of everybody. You have the GMs that are, establishing a market of players that determines their value, and they're able to fit in the pieces with incredible, complicated operations of cash flows. You have the head coaches, who are politicians. They're telling you a story that everybody has to believe, and they have a strategy of what they think people care about in order to gain trust and buy-in from the players. And then you have, the offensive line, who are like the manufacturing industry. They have to work with each other to produce. They have a lot of issues, and they're always going to get blamed for everything. The skill positions are the hustlers, the salesmen. Everything is numbers. They just care about numbers. And then you have the most important piece in the football team, the CEO, the quarterback, the person that can make the decisions that matter most and influence the outcome of the game. So the military in football, American society in football, or tied in together, and it is a beautiful thing to experience. And so for me, I got to see how this passion and this love for the military in the NFL is not something that is coincidental. It's real. It's maybe something that has to do with the fact that football originated in a time, when there was no war, or a lot of people didn't get to serve in World War One, and men needed to find a way to prove themselves as warriors.
I know our listeners are going to want to hear a little bit about what it's actually like to be in an NFL football game. So let me ask you, when you walk up to the line of scrimmage, you're looking across at someone who wants nothing more than to bury your $20 million quarterback or CEO in the dirt. Did your time in Afghanistan sort of put that in perspective? And how are you thinking about that kind of risk as you're walking up there and looking across the line at that guy?
Yeah, for sure. So I think playing offensive lineman is all about minimizing mistakes and achieving the highest level of consistency. Is not about an opportunity to explode and to make a play like it is for a defensive player. A defensive player, all he wants to do is get one sack per game. An offensive lineman has to minimize the entire the effectiveness of the opponent throughout the entire game, because you don't know which play could result in a sack fumble, which is a catastrophic type of play in football, because it gives the ball to the opponent.
So you have to be perfect every time, and he only has to be successful once. Is that
right? So So it does become more of a mind game, and you're trying to put yourself in the best position every single time to minimize the risk of a catastrophic play. You minimize catastrophic plays. What is the worst thing that can happen in this play? And then you try to adjust to the best of your abilities, but putting yourself always in the best position from the very beginning. So if you line up in a play and it's a pass, and you know that you're going to be one-on-one with the defender, you have to always understand that the shortest route to the quarterback is going to be going through your inside. If he has to go outside and run the loop, it's going to take a little longer. So you stay inside out as you protect the quarterback. If you have help and the guard or the player who's to your right is going to be looking at you, then you know that the worst thing that can happen is that he goes to your outside. So you're going to be more aggressive to his outside shoulder. And so utilizing these principles, you could come up with a strategy that would minimize the risk of having catastrophic plays. And that was the mentality that any offensive lineman that plays in the National Football League has to keep in mind throughout the entire game.
From fighter pilots to base jumpers to neurosurgeons.
Or, the rest of us 9-to-5 hustlers.
Everyone needs a bold morning jumpstart or a robust afternoon pick-me-up from a slow, steep Dunkin' cold brew.
Whether looking straight down the face of a 1,000-foot cliff or staring wide-eyed into a baffling computer spreadsheet, we all need the same thing.
So whatever your pursuit, start with a Dunkin' cold brew.
Watching the games, it seems like the most obvious risk, and the thing that looks scary to me is just all you big guys on the line facing each other and then colliding. How do you avoid injuries, or how do you minimize the risk of an injury? That's remarkable
and it's
to watch.
Remarkable. You never missed a game, right?
So there's a saying in the NFL that is, very, it left a mark in me, and that was the best ability is availability. If you don't miss any games, if you're able to come to practice every single day, if you're able to keep your body healthy, then it's going to result in a better ability than making plays or being a phenomenal football player for 2 or 3 games and then having to miss out 4 or 5 games. So minimizing injuries, minimizing the time that you're off the field was paramount for any success in the National Football League. I was very fortunate and I'm very lucky, and I cannot say that I had a method to minimize those injuries. I did get hurt and I had to play through tough injuries throughout my entire career. But there is a concept, or there is, especially now that I'm retired and I can look back at my time, there is a culture of utilizing medicine to get ready for games that unfortunately is not the best health practices. So sometimes you have to get a cortisol shot on your knee, on your hip, on your shoulder, so that you can be ready to play. Some players decide not to make such sacrifices because they are not good for the body and they're not good for you. But I always felt that, I came from a place that, did not have a lot of red carpets and limousines pulling up to the facilities and introducing me. I came from the bottom. And so I always did what I had to do to be out there on Sundays, regardless of how my body felt. And so, injuries happen. You have to learn how to deal with them. And then, for me, the path that I took was the path of medicine. So I took Toradol before every single game. And then if I needed it, and, cortisol shots, so I could be good to go. And, now looking back, obviously, it will be something that I will have to pay for the rest of my life. But it's the trade-offs that we have to pick in life.
So is offensive line the most dangerous, risky position on what it looks like it with the clashing that you guys every play into each other? Yeah.
There's a lot of debate, and there's a lot of force obviously in this because players are so big and fast, and I'm sure the formula for kinetic energy
Yeah.
and how mass and velocity, especially velocity, has an incredible effect on how you're going to absorb his kinetic energy and how two bodies collide. But according to this formula, velocity does have the
Mm-hmm.
largest impact, and there's not that much distance between
Mm-hmm.
players on the line of scrimmage. However, there's a lot of velocity going in different directions when you look at defensive backs and wide receivers. And so the biggest risk, in my opinion, was always when a defenseless receiver, a receiver that's looking at the ball, it gets hit by
Mm.
a defensive player. So that was my
Mm.
excuse, so that I wouldn't think that I was in the most dangerous position. To think that someone else was paying the price. But the NFL has been adjusting accordingly because as a media company, they know they have a lot of negative uh, uh, you know images of players getting knocked out unconscious, and that kills the younger generations deciding to play football, moms being scared, and if there's less players playing, it affects the branding and how influential football is in our daily lives.
So, Al, you hear so much about the offensive line room on an NFL team being where all the brainy guys are, but it's also maybe a little different culture. And I was privileged to take your Steelers teammate David DeCastro on a USO tour, and what a fantastic human being he is. Tell us a little bit about the culture. You were in two different teams, actually three. What is the culture like in that offensive line room compared to maybe the others?
I think offensive lines are always going to be the same. I was fortunate enough to play different positions, and I think that's a better question. What is it like to play different positions in the NFL? Like I said earlier, when you're a skill player, when you're a
Yeah.
wide receiver, the only thing that matters is numbers. There are numbers attached to your name. If you're a defensive player, they're always going to look at you for how many sacks do you have on the season. If you're a wide receiver, how many touchdowns and how many yards. And if you're an offensive lineman, there's not really any numbers that are attached to your performance. I mean, people can talk about like how many sacks do you give up, or but those things depend most of the time, obviously on your performance, but on the team performance. If the quarterback holding the ball too long, is the quarterback getting flushed and getting hit by your guy when you're
Yeah.
not even looking. So
Yeah.
I thought that playing offensive line is a very selfless position, a position that matters because you're needed to protect other players, and you have to learn how to work together. And what matters in that position is not your numbers, and is not what people are saying about you, is how what your teammates are saying about you, and whether they trust you, and whether they want to play with you, and whether you're helping them. So relationships matter tremendously in offensive lines, and I got the privilege to play for two amazing offensive lines with amazing human beings. And I think the culture and the disposition of offensive linemen to help each other is what defines the position of an offensive lineman. And I'm very fortunate that I was able to play offensive lineman because I feel like your ego becomes your biggest enemy when you play other positions that carry a stat or a number next to you throughout your entire career.
I would argue that's probably a direct carryover from your time and your experience with the military.
Of course.
That total dependence and reliance, and that a consistent, quiet, consistent, reliable presence is more important than superstar status or something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Al, to the layman, it feels like having a super elite passing quarterback at the moment is sort of a necessary, though not sufficient, ingredient to achieving success in the NFL. But there's 32 teams out there, and not all 32 teams can have an elite passing quarterback. I think you have some thoughts on that. Do you see any possibility for disruption where a team might rethink the whole concept, spend their money on a running game with passing being subordinate, or where do you see that going? You were always an advocate for the running game, I think, and I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
That's an amazing question. I think that we're in the world of football. Everybody's tired of experts. So this is just my thought on how I view the NFL and how I view the sport. You can achieve that easily in high school, and you can achieve that as well in college. You seem teams like Alabama, they if you were to run numbers and you can get the best players running the ball is the easiest way because you can physically impose yourself on your opponents. But the NFL has these figures, these owners that are looking at ratings for football games. And they're understanding that, things such as fantasy football and gambling are becoming a bigger part of the game. And they also understand that if you don't have a good football game, all 4 quarters, you're going to lose a lot of the revenue from the commercials in the second half of the game. And most people do not like to watch teams run the football. Most teams want to see receivers make spectacular catches, reviews, officials looking at the play and having controversy associated with each game, whether it was a touchdown or not. I think that the NFL understands that this is what's selling and this is what matters. And so they're changing the rules to make it easier to pass the ball. They started changing the rules so that cornerbacks could not press receivers, or, they made it very difficult for a corner to not get called for holding or pass interference. And that is inciting teams to take more risk as they plan, their game plan, into throwing the football more often. So the game has become a passing league, and you have to have a quarterback that can win the game in the fourth quarter because they're trying to push all the variables and all the conditions of the game so that you have a tied game towards the end. And if you've been watching football for a long time, you can see how games are becoming, especially this past season, they're becoming more competitive and almost all the way through the fourth quarter.
So just out of curiosity, does that affect how you approach your job as an offensive lineman, whether you've got a running quarterback or a passing quarterback, or where these rules are going?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I think most teams identify that, the passing game is the most crucial part of the game that has to work in order to be a contender for the Super Bowl. If you don't win the Super Bowl, you're going to ultimately get fired regardless of how good you can coach for however many years. Super Bowls is the only thing that matters. And so the passing game becomes the area of the game that you have to develop the most. We talked earlier about, sort of your strategy. Yeah, I love running the football, but I made my living being able to pass protect because that's what matters. And that's why, especially if you play left tackle, that's what's going to be looked at, when evaluating, what you can contribute to a football team.
So speaking of passing, you got a touchdown pass in 2018. That had to be quite an experience for an offensive tackle. Tell us a little bit about that.
Nah, it was, I played receiver in college, so I was able, I can catch the ball and I understand how to move in space and where am I at in relationship with the quarterback of the ball. But the touchdown that I caught was a trick play, so they were not expecting me to be wide open. So it was from the 2-yard line. Like, who runs a fake field goal on the 2-yard line? So it was not as stressful as, being able to defend a pass, with 2 minutes left to win the game.
It still had to be cool though.
Nah,
okay. I like your modesty. That comes from your background of service. Now, I know there was a lot of sort of fun rhetoric that accompanied your move to the Ravens. But what was it really like switching teams? You moved from left tackle to right tackle. You were in a very different system with a completely different quarterback style and a different coach. And you mentioned earlier that offensive lines are fairly similar, but was that a big shift for you, switching teams?
Oh my God, absolutely! It was crazy. I mean, obviously they're huge rivals, and so it was very awkward in many ways. But I don't have any social media. I'm very disconnected from people that I do not know, mainly because of my nature. I'm not trying to be famous. I'm trying to achieve my financial goals of paying for business school. And when it came down to deciding whether I wanted to continue to play, I wanted to buy my parents a house. That was one of the dreams that I always had, because I saw a lot of NFL players have this romanticized idea of why you wanted to play in the NFL, and that's to buy your parents a house. So I wanted to make sure that I was financially set. And then, when it came down to my last year in Pittsburgh and whether I was going to retire or continue to play, I decided to play one more year so that I could buy my parents a house, enroll at Naval Station, and I could come visit them. And, I could say that I played football and I made money for something other than myself. The transition to the Baltimore Ravens was very easy because John Harbaugh was a coach that utilized a narrative. We talked about coaches being politicians. He used a narrative that was very similar to general officers in the army, which is, we're going to be the toughest, we're going to be trained the hardest, we're going to take the fight to the enemy. And so the culture aspect of the Baltimore Ravens was very cool to experience and to know what made the Steelers and the Ravens unique. And then living in Baltimore was awesome because my in-laws and my wife is from Maryland. So, we have 4 kids, and being able to have help was crucial, because during the season I'm unable to be around, especially on the weekends when I'm playing away.
So I have to ask because, sorry, Sandy, but Al, I have to ask because I have been curious the whole time we've been talking to you. Your journey has been, I'm going to do everything I can to get to the point where I can pay for getting an MBA. Why an MBA? What is your goal with the MBA? Because you've been very focused on that since West Point, actually.
Right. I think West Point is the reason why. I think there's a culture surrounding West Point cadets. Just like being infantry was, one of the things that people coveted. I feel like I made decisions based on what everybody else thought was the path to success. So everybody thought in high school that going to West Point was a very good decision because it would increase your chances of success. Everybody thought that being infantry would increase your chance of success, and actually, infantry is the fastest route to become a general. Most generals are usually infantrymen. That's from what I heard, is the reason why they started letting women into the infantry, because there were not that many female generals, so they had to be able to open that door. So the infantry is the fastest way to success. And then when you get out of West Point, you realize that it's not as easy as you thought it was, and the path to success is to be able to get an MBA and be able to sit down in front of companies that are hiring at these MBA programs, so that you can continue on with your future.
Have you finished it yet? Sorry, Sandy.
I finished it. Yeah, I finished.
Yay!
I finished it.
Congratulations.
I finished it. A few years ago. Yeah. Usually it takes a year and a half for full times, and it takes maybe 2 or 3 for part timers. But it took me almost 4 years because I was unable to take the same workload as my peers.
And so now that you've finished it, you've got a pretty good skill set, right? You've got Army Ranger, you've got NFL offensive lineman, you've got a quality MBA from Carnegie Mellon. What comes next? You going to relax for a while, or is it ready to charge forward?
Yeah, I was talking to Sandra about this before the call. It's fascinating how not just at West Point, but just in American society, we're always thinking about work, and work is a trait that is defined not just the majority of Americans who've migrated from Europe into the United States, but sort of who we've become. We're a society of workers, and we're always constantly trying to improve our position and keeping up with the Joneses and all the sayings and the things that we have. Fortunately or unfortunately for me, I am Spanish, and the Spanish don't have the same philosophy. They have a philosophy that is a lot more laid back, and it's a lot more focused around maybe self-improvement. And perhaps that's why they get to live, 150 years old. So as of right now, I'm unsure. I just retired last week. So, maybe if you ask me in a couple months, I'll have a better answer. But as of right now, I'm relocating to Miami, Florida. It's a city that I fell in love with when I came to the United States, and it definitely embodies the vision that I had of individuality and lack of collective groups. And so once I get settled, and when I have the urge or the need to do something, I'm sure it'll drive me into diving into the next adventure.
Al, as long as you're following your passions and your interests, you're successful, right? Any other definition of success is irrelevant, right? So
yeah, it's the journey, not the destination.
You have a wonderful journey ahead of you.
Well, we could talk to you for another hour. This has been really fascinating for both of us. But we do probably have to wrap up. And I just want to thank you so much for being with us today in the Adrenaline Zone. I know you hear this a lot and it can be cliche, but I want to tell you thank you so much for your service in the U.S. Army. I'm proud to know you. I look forward to cooking a paella with you someday. And we both wish you the very best in what is certain to be a pretty interesting future ahead of you.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for your service. And thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
That was NFL offensive tackle and former Army Ranger Alejandro Villanueva. I'm Sandra Magnus.
And I'm Sandy Winnefeld. Many thanks to our sponsor, Dunkin'. Dunkin' fuels the people who take on every challenge head first. And we know the right kind of fuel they need, an ultra-smooth Dunkin' cold brew.
Join us back in the Adrenaline Zone next week for a new episode.
If you like our show, be sure to follow us and write a review. And tell your friends about us.
And if you have a suggestion for an adrenaline seeker we might want to interview, visit our website at theadrenalinezone.com.